and welcome to another episode of the Law of Attraction for Writers podcast. I'm your host, Suzanne Lieurance of WriteByTheSea.com, and I've got a question for you. Have you ever noticed that the closer you get to finishing a book or submitting your work or taking some kind of big step toward your writing dream, the easier it becomes to find reasons not to move forward? I've seen this happen with writers a lot, myself included. For example, maybe you suddenly decide you need to do more research, or you think you should revise chapter 1 just one more time, or you decide to start outlining a completely different book. I've seen this happen a lot. Or you convince yourself that life is simply too busy right now to finish your writing or to get on with it. And all those sound like reasonable decisions, but today I want to suggest that they may be something else entirely. Now, back in episode 7, we talked about resistance. So if you haven't listened to that episode, you might want to go back either after this podcast or stop this one now and go back and listen to 7 first. Because today I want to take that conversation from episode 7 a step further, because resistance rarely announces itself. Most of the time, it shows up disguised as fear. And fear doesn't usually feel like fear, so you think, what are you talking about? I'm never afraid. I'm fine. Well, one thing I've learned from working with writers for years and years is that fear is incredibly creative. It doesn't say, oh, don't write, you're afraid to do that, you should move ahead. Instead, it says things to you that sound more comforting, things like, you're not quite ready, or just take one more course, or read one more book, or edit this chapter one more time, or wait until you have more time. And that could sound practical, it sounds responsible, but if those thoughts keep showing up month after month while your manuscript never gets finished, fear may be making your decisions without you even realizing it. And this is sometimes hard for readers to accept, that they're not moving ahead because they're afraid. They're thinking, I just want to get this chapter really right. I want to get things just so perfect, but it's really fear keeping them from moving ahead. So there are many faces of resistance. It can look like procrastination, where you just keep putting it off. You don't realize you're resisting. You just think, I'm not doing it right now. But more often it looks like perfectionism. That's really common. It can also look like endlessly researching instead of writing, because let's face it, most of us, we like to do research, and we can convince ourselves we're moving ahead with the manuscript if we get to a part where we're a little bit stuck and we think, well, I'll go do some more research. Then we think we're still productive, we're still moving ahead. But you got to be careful that you're not just stalling, because that's most often what's happening when you start to continually do research. Resistance can also look like constantly starting exciting new projects instead of finishing the one that's already halfway done. I've seen this happen all the time. People get started on something, they get midway through, or they finish the first draft, now they're going back to edit, and suddenly every other project in the world seems more exciting, so they'll start outlining another book, or they'll say, well, I'm going to do this once I get finished with my manuscript. Well, save that till you get finished with the manuscript. Just focus on this one book at a time. Because I've seen writers spend years polishing the first 3 chapters of a novel, and they never discover what happens in chapter 4. They just can't move ahead. Don't let that happen to you. But resistance doesn't always stop you from writing. Sometimes it just keeps you from finishing. So even if you're working and you're not finishing, you've got to ask yourself, okay, what's going on here? I'm facing some kind of resistance if I'm not finishing. Believe me, it doesn't take years to finish a book. If it did, you wouldn't have all these people like Stephen King, Danielle Steele, James Patterson, with all these books out there, even though many of those writers have people helping them write their books now. But they did start out doing a lot themselves to get established, so they had to finish things fairly quickly. So here's why all this matters. The law of attraction teaches us that where our attention goes, our energy follows. So if your attention is constantly focused on what might go wrong or what's not right or what you need to fix, those fears begin influencing your choices, okay? So as a result, you submit your work less often, or you don't get things finished, or you share less of your work. And eventually it feels as though opportunities just aren't showing up. But often we've quietly stopped putting ourselves where opportunities can find us. If you don't get your book finished, nobody's going to ever find you, right? They're not going to be able to read it. If you don't get your blog post up there, nobody's going to find your blog. Nobody's going to, visit your website. So here's a simple reality check. If you hear yourself saying, I'll do it when, instead of sitting down and doing something and finishing it, pause for a moment and then ask yourself, okay, if I'm waiting, is this wisdom or is this fear? Because there are times when waiting is wise, but there are also times when waiting is simply resistance wearing a very convincing disguise. So here's your writing challenge for the week. I want you to notice every excuse your mind gives you for postponing your writing or postponing finishing something. Don't argue with those thoughts, just notice them. And then I want you to take one small action step anyway. Maybe write one page, finish one scene, send one query, publish one blog post. Every time you act in spite of fear, you teach yourself that fear doesn't get to make your decisions. And I love that phrase because I think it's really something good to think about. Is fear getting to make your decisions? I don't want fear to make my decisions. I'm sure you don't either. So I'll leave you with one final thought today. Resistance isn't always a sign that you're headed in the wrong direction, and this is good news. Sometimes it's a sign that you're about to grow. Because the closer you get to becoming the writer you've always wanted to be, the more your comfort zone will try to pull you back. So recognize that for what it is. Thank it for trying to protect you, but then keep writing anyway. Let's get something finished. Move ahead. Don't resist. Don't get stuck, okay? So thank you for joining me for another episode of the Law of Attraction for Writers. And if you'd like more encouragement, accountability, and tips for completing your work and building the writer's life you want, I'd like to invite you to join Monday Morning Manifestors. You can find out more about our group that meets every Monday on Zoom at mondaymorningmanifestors.com or at writebythesea.com. And if you haven't subscribed to my free Monday morning nudge that you get via email 5 days a week, just go to morningnudge.com and sign up for that, okay? So have a great week, and until next time, happy writing.